Good afternoon, and we welcome you to another one of the Veterans Forum programs. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we've made this a particular project, if you will, to make sure that we make available to any and every guy and gal who served anywhere in any of the wars a chance to come and relive those memories, but more important, to share them with us and to give everybody a better view of what really happened, because these are the guys and gals who were there that made that history. My name is Bob Stevens. I'll be the host again, and hope that you'll enjoy what we're seeing. Today is the 16th of March, 2010. Boy, is time going by quickly. We have another wonderful guy today who'll share his experiences with you. I'll just call him Bruce, which is a very good name to me because that's my son's name. I knew we had something good in common. Bruce, if you will, introduce yourself, spell your last name, give us your branch of service, and where and when you just got started. Then we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for the opportunity to be interviewed and archived along with many men and women who have served our country. My name is Bruce Shepley, S-H-E-P-L-E-Y. I'm native of North Adams, Massachusetts. I'm a resident of Adams, Massachusetts. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force Reserve, a member of the 439th Air Medical Evacuation Squadron out of Westover Air Reserve Base in Massachusetts. And I have been there since I was commissioned in November of 1992.
Wow, that's a while ago, huh?
It seems like it, but it seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
You wonder where the years go,
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're one of the senior member in the unit.
Yeah, when they look at you and say, sir, even if you're just a PFC, the gray has more than the grass down here. Well, okay, what I'd like to do to kind of set the stage, as we try to do, is to have you go back and tell where you were born, when, and how it was like growing up, high school and college and so forth, if you did that before you went in the service, so that it gives you and us a chance to find out what's going on.
Well, as I stated, I was born in North Adams in 1951 to Olive and Doug Shepley. My parents were immigrants from the United Kingdom, from England in the late 1940s after the war. My father, a veteran of the British Army, served in North Africa. My father was a painting contractor, had his own business for many years, and my mother was a housewife and stayed home and raised us. And they both are. My mother passed away in 1989, my father in the early 03, I believe. We're a close-knit family. I have two brothers, went to schools in North Adams, struggled through school.
Most of us did.
Yep. My guidance counselor said I wasn't college material, and he said, go in the military. I didn't. I worked for my father for quite a while through a series of personal events. I decided that I wanted to become an emergency medical technician, and went to Berkshire Community College in the late 70s, I think around 76, 77, became an emergency medical technician. Started working for North Adams Ambulance in 1977 when it was founded. And the first time I walked in the emergency room in my role, I knew right away that nursing was what I wanted to do.
Good, you lucked out.
And I was very fortunate. And I went to McCann School, vocational school in North Adams in 1980 to 1981, in their 9-month vocational program for operating room technician. Graduated from there in 81, worked at Cooley Dickinson Hospital for 4 years in Northampton, Massachusetts. And while I was doing that, I pursued my nursing degree through the University of the State of New York, an external degree program, and received my diploma in December of 1984.
So you're a real RN, if you will.
I am a real RN in every sense of the word.
Good.
I worked at North Adams Regional Hospital from August of 1985 and until February of this year when I retired.
Good. No, excuse me, either of your brothers in the service, or they have
My brother had, my younger brother had 11-year service in the Army Reserve.
Mm-hmm, good.
Yep.
So it's a family tradition, in fact, to a degree.
Yeah, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, there's been whatever got us there. The three of us have represented either the United Kingdom or the United States.
Okay, well, Anglo-American.
That's right.
You can have tea or coffee, whichever one you like.
That's right.
No. What was the, if you will, the prompt that got you to join the Guard or the Reserve?
Sort of an interesting story, that there was no drive to serve my country. There was no drive to wear a uniform. But as an RN at the hospital, I very much enjoyed overtime and the monetary rewards it brought. And I worked a lot of overtime on the floors in the newborn nursery, in pediatrics, and the highs and lows of overtime and staffing. There was a lull somewhere in around 91. And I happened to walk into the post office one day, and I saw a glossy. One of the posters, recruiting posters, said, "Be a flight nurse." And I came home, talked to my wife, told her what I was going to make a call, and from there on, it took about a year and a half through, I was 41 at the time. So there was waiver processes and the interviews, and it's not a well-oiled machine, the recruiting machine. But I was worked the system, was interviewed, and over in Westover with Lieutenant Colonel Richard Carr back in 1992, who was the unit commander, and raised my hand and was commissioned in November of 92.
Good.
Yep.
Good.
And it's,
then what happened? That's what we'd like to hear you.
Well, from that point on, life has been very, very different. Your values change, and you look at things through very different eyes. The red, white, and blue is an extremely significant tricolors for
good
me.
Good color scheme, yeah.
Now, and our need and our want to be part of defending 200 years of history is almost paramount.
That's what we're trying to do, because one of the main facets of the program, you may or may not know, and for you people out there, we've kind of structured this, if you will, as one tremendous puzzle. But each one of us, you, me, and everybody out there, is one piece in that puzzle. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that the guys and gals who, if you will, made that history will have it properly recorded, so people coming after us, which frankly, it's getting awfully close to that time right now, will have a better appreciation of exactly what happened and the cost of this freedom. Okay, I didn't mean to get on the soapbox, but this is a chance for people to, as they say, tell it like it is. And that's what we're going to ask Bruce to do now. Starting way back when you first were commissioned, we talked at first about your initial training as a memo or whatever. Those are the kinds of things, if you will.
It was an
share.
acronym, MIMSO. It stood for the Military Indoctrination of Medical Service Officers. I had to remember it. I spent 2 full weeks back in February of 1993 at Lackland Air Force Base down in San Antonio, Texas, learning to put the uniform on, where the different badges went, what a salute meant, and the courtesies
and who
that
saluted
were.
who. Yeah.
That's right. We learned some rudimentary leadership skills, the expectations of what a commissioned officer was supposed to be doing. I always remember, and I brag about the fact that I spent 8 hours one day watching Gregory Peck in 12 O'Clock High, analyzing the different, or having analyzed for us the different leadership techniques of the different commanders of the squadron back then. MIMSO was just that. You came away with a little, it wasn't boot camp. In fact, at 41, I wasn't allowed to run for physical, during the physical training. I was allowed to walk. I could walk the 3 miles.
The stately gentleman.
The stately gentleman. I was probably one of the oldest. I think there was a female Navy commander nurse who would have outranked me. She may have been a lieutenant commander.
Wow.
So it went the gamut of people just out of nursing school to some people with a fair amount of nursing experience. When I was commissioned, I had been in the nursing career for about 7 years at the time.
Okay. You had the practical, not the political.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now, you mentioned your wife. Now, what was her reaction, if you will? I know it's a mutual situation, but a lot of the times the gals have a very strong influence on what we have done.
Well, I think we both went into it with our eyes wide shut, not knowing. My expectation and the sell I did on it made it sound like it was 1 weekend a month, 15 days a year. As a flyer, I have additional flying responsibilities for training. Back in 1992, there was very little, if any, active duty or need for flying, so it was training. Reservists typically will train in their drill weekends and in their 15 days a year in their career fields for the time when you're called upon and truly needed, such as
ready.
What has happened since 9/11.
Okay. Now, could you touch on some of your early assignments, if you will, with respect to how you felt, what you received, and more important, how you may in turn have been able to help other people get along and get in and do their job?
It's always been an easy career field to promote and be able to brag about, saying what a great career field that it's been and what a great opportunity is for anybody that's been interested in it. Back in 1993, by the time I was starting to get my feet wet, I was commissioned as a first lieutenant. You learn the paperwork. The interesting thing about being commissioned as a nurse is you have your profession and your skills typically in place. They're not teaching you the basics of nursing.
No OJT.
Right. It's not on-the-job training.
Okay.
So what you're dealing with is the bureaucracy, the paperwork, the customs and courtesies, the little idiosyncrasies that might be different from your civilian job. Being an operating room nurse on the civilian side and being a flight nurse in the military are totally two unrelated career fields. And since we've been very busy these last 9 years, people are always under the impression that I'm doing something that's related to my surgical nursing career, and that's just not what I do. I transport the sick and the wounded and the injured in my as a flight nurse.
Yeah. Now, with respect to your flying capabilities, what sort of training did you have to have with respect to how you comported yourself when you were on board a plane or when you were loading or unloading, so that we can get an idea of what really goes on? That's what I'm trying to find.
Shortly after, in fact, it was just a matter of a couple of weeks, I believe, after leaving MIMSO in San Antonio, in March or early April of that year, I went for a 5-week course for flight nurse. It's the flight school down at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio. Very comprehensive, detailed overview of aircraft familiarization, working with the various equipment we use in the aeromedical evacuation world, the different modes of transport. At the time, there were various aircraft that we would transport patients on. There was the C-9, the C-141, the C-130. The C-141 and the C-9 are no longer in our inventory.
Oh.
I spend most of my time training and flying live missions on the C-130 and more recently on the KC-135, the air refueler, which we've adapted for aeromedical evacuation, and even more so on the C-17, the real workhorse in the Air Force aircraft inventory right now for moving patients, troops, equipment.
Now that's something that I'll know a lot. I, for one, am interested in hearing from the guy that did it, if you will. How do you? I can't say train for it, but how do you become acclimated or accustomed to knowing where, when, and how the different kinds of people to be evacuated, as far as the different casualty rate, missing parts, high altitude? Do they have to have any special treatments inside the planes? Are the planes configured to, if you will, have air pressures and so forth necessary?
They are, and that's a great question. Considerations in moving patients are certainly altitude, the distance you're moving them because of the time frame. There's less humidity. So some of the considerations of transportation are lack of humidity, vibration, noise, where you need to position that person by their injury or their diagnosis. And all those are just are what we train to do all the time. We would always train with as real life scenarios as we could, using actual medical records of patients that have been moved in the system over the years, to make it as realistic and to do the hands-on in as realistic a mode as possible.
So they're real comfort and care.
You're right. Being extremely familiar with the equipment you use on a C-130, and I don't know how much you know about the C-130. It's been in the inventory since '56 or 1957, and we're up to a J model now. They don't have their own oxygen supply for medical. They have stanchions so that we can configure it for litters and transporting litter patients or ambulatory patients. But everything we need to treat those patients, we have to bring with us in our medical supply kits.
Okay, so you're a flying MASH unit, in effect.
Well,
is that a bad way to put it?
You know, I think that's sort of a misconception that when you think of MASH, it was a forward operating surgical hospital that could quickly move. And basically, we're an air ambulance. We transport in the air in an ambulance, which happens to be an airframe. Okay. Our capability in the last 20 years has increased tremendously in the type of patients that we can transport via air in a short period of time versus needing to stabilize those patients on the ground for a period of time.
Now what's the golden hour? That's pretty critical when you're up there.
The golden hour is an extremely critical period in trauma. And the system, I think, is to be respected in the world for being able to have an extremely high survival rate of troops that get injured and to be treated and into a forward surgical capable facility in that first hour. I know that in a couple of my tours in active duty, whether it was flying in Germany into Iraq and Afghanistan, Kuwait, and the whole Middle East, back in '03, '04 into '05, and then this last year in Afghanistan, we were transporting some extremely injured by trauma, by IED blasts, that probably not too many years ago we wouldn't have worried about transporting them because they would not have survived their insults.
Now, without violating any secrecies of that kind of stuff, but could you give us some examples of the different categories of care you'd have to give these guys from the different bases that you worked from, and how are you summoned in there? Are you standby someplace, and if you will, like a taxi, you're called to go here, or are you stationed at a central area and then branch out
That's
from
a pretty
there?
good description, being a taxi on standby, and it's are you a taxi on standby, or are you a limousine that's going to travel somewhere to pick up somebody? In 1903, in 2003 and 2004, I had the honor of being temporarily assigned over at Ramstein Air Base in Germany.
Oh, Germany.
And what we were doing from that positioning point was the strategic transportation, the long distance transportation of the sick and wounded. We would fly in on regular basis or urgent basis to points within the theater, fly the 5 hours from Germany. We would have about 3.5 hours of alert time to be prepared to fly out, do the 5 hours, spend 3 hours on the ground, take those that were awaiting transportation and bring them back to Germany, which is different than what I was doing in Afghanistan when you're on very short notice. You had 2 hours, up to an hour, or depending on if you were on Alpha Alert, you had an hour to respond. If you were on Bravo Alert, you had up to 3 hours and 15 minutes to be alerted and to be wheels up. Those were the short hops intra-theater within Afghanistan itself, flying to forward bases and positions to bring the sick and wounded back to Bagram Air Base in the, I believe it was the northeast section of Afghanistan, where they would then be transported typically to Landstuhl Army Medical Center through Ramstein Air Base in Germany.
Now, when you had to make some of these, if you will, quick pickups, were you subjected to firepower? Or shot at or blown at?
We were always subjected to it. It was the first time in my career that I felt that you were in harm's way, for lack of a
guy
description.
could get hurt out there.
But I don't think you walked on the aircraft and you walked off the aircraft every day, and it wasn't in the forefront of your mind.
Okay.
But when you knew you were going over there, medical people, I think, seek out certain rewards, and those rewards tend to be the excitement of what we do. There's not a whole lot that is mundane in air evac. There's nothing that's completely routine in air evac. And every time we went out the door, there was a certain level of adrenaline and a certain level of excitement pumped up to go do their job and bring the men and women back and get them back to getting well.
Now, when you get the call, are you in some way, if you will, they've done triage at the site, know what to expect so that you could be gearing up or getting ready for when you do land, you don't waste too much time loading and going?
For the most part, and I can't think of any exceptions to the tour I did in Afghanistan, we pretty much knew who we were going out for and what we were getting. The medical system in theater has done a phenomenal job, from just the basic Army troop level of self-aid buddy care and being able to stop some bleeding, getting them in a very short period of time to a higher level of care, which could be anywhere from 20 minutes on a vehicle, or to have somebody in a dust-off helicopter come in and pick them up and get them to an advanced place with surgical capability. There were multiple places in Afghanistan with surgical capability where they could be stabilized. The main hub to bring them out of Afghanistan in the medical system was Kandahar, or usually more so Bagram Air Base. So that as far as the stabilization goes and the initial triage, that's all been done.
Okay.
We've been called.
Pre-packaged for that.
Pretty much so. Anywhere, and without being exact and without, I would guesstimate anywhere from 6 hours to 24 hours, or depending on how they were classified as a routine, a priority, or an urgent patient.
Now, is there any special treatment with respect to what we're hearing a lot today about some of the guys who have had brain trauma, as opposed to not physically wounded, but they've been really wounded bad? How do you handle those?
Brain trauma is a physical insult. It's a result of gunshot or IED explosion. There's a significant amount of it. It's been decreased somewhat as we learn, and I say we as the troops in the field learn what to be looking for, the protective gear they wear, how they look out for one another. It is handled differently because, as I spoke earlier, there's a survival rate now that is probably the highest it's ever been in military history for being able to get these patients out. And that's due to the introduction in the last 10 years or so of the CCAT team, the CCATT, Critical Air Transport Team, comprised of a physician, a nurse with intensive care or critical care experience, and a respiratory therapist. There was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, in our history of Vietnam, when and again you would know World War II, that troops that were injured, if they were unstable, they couldn't be transported, and you had to either wait a long period of time for them to stabilize, or to die in theater. We are transporting extremely critical patients that would be classified as hemodynamically unstable, and getting them into Germany and home to the States, particularly the extreme burn patients, where we will utilize a critical air transport team, surgical interventions, life support, and we're transporting these individuals on life support to Germany, where if it's a burn victim, a team comes from San Antonio, Brooks Army Medical Burn Center, and they are directly airlifted from Germany to San Antonio. So the survival rate, the techniques, the interventions that take place with all these different injuries is keeping many, many people alive, not only alive, salvageable, and returning them to some level of activity, if not 100%.
Yeah, that's good to know, by God. Now, you've talked about Afghanistan and some of the other places. Climactically, it may sound weird, but are there any things with respect to dust storms, wind storms, or what have you, that would cause you to have to go to some other place?
Weather is always a factor when you're in the air, whether it's you're transporting troops, whether you're moving patients, whether you're transporting cargo. The weather played a role on some days with us in Afghanistan. We might get alerted and have to delay being able to get into a specific forward base, maybe by hours, maybe by days. Many times we would try to land at a place, circle around for an hour waiting for a break in the clouds, or for runways, because of many of these runways were unimproved runways, packed dirt.
Oh, yeah.
And if they were wet, in the wet season, you had to wait. And we would go back, and sometimes it was a matter of an hour or two, and where you could go back into the same forward operating base and bring back your patients, or maybe you had to wait for the next crew. You ran out of your duty day, and the next crew would get tasked because the conditions got better.
Now, are you assigned at that point on a rotational basis, or are you qualified or cataloged by your particular skills as to where and when you went?
We're all equal as basic air crew. We're all equally qualified. Now you have a diverse background in what your crew is. Each crew in Afghanistan was comprised of 2 nurses, RNs, and 3 medical technicians. The medical technicians in the Air Force are trained to at least the EMT basic level. Some of them were brand new on their first deployments, had never deployed. Some were experienced emergency medical technicians. But on the civilian side, with the nurses, they could be anywhere from critical care nurses, operating room nurses, to nurses that filled out insurance forms on the civilian side. Same with the medical technicians. The medical technicians may have a medical background on the civilian side and work in a hospital setting or in a medical career field, or they may be cooks, dietitians working for Verizon or Time Warner, and that their military career field is medical and totally unrelated to what they do on the civilian side.
That must be an interesting situation, though.
Well, it is.
You get a TB technician as an OR specialist. You know,
Right. It is for a lot of reasons. For those who like to teach, for those who like to mentor, it's a wonderful opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity for those with the medical background to be able to learn from them, no matter what your level of training is and what you do, and how long you've been doing it.
Now, how do they, if you will, man and staff up? Is it a active recruiting program, or do you just happen to have people that have these skills? How do you fill out your complement and select the people?
If I'm understanding your question right.
Which means I'm not asking it right.
Well, to be recruited into the Air Force, if you're asking me that, or if you're asking me how do we fill the crews when we're staffing to go to Afghanistan.
The second one, yes.
If we're
manning table stuff.
there's a rotation in the system, and the system being the countrywide, that there are X amount of aeromedical evacuation squadrons in the country. There are X amount of CCAT teams in the country, and all the support systems, whether it's
to back them up.
ASTS, which basically you think of an airport terminal. Well, an ASTS is an airport terminal for patients, which is where we would get our patients from many times. Excuse me. In the AirVac world, there's a rotation system that might say that Westover, McGuire Air Force Base, Pope Air Force Base is in the bucket right now. That for the next year and a half, you have the potential of being tasked to fill the slots that are out there. After that 18-month period, you have possibly a 36-month period where you won't be tasked. But if there are vacancies and you can be released by your unit commander, you could fill some of these vacancies as an additional rotation.
Oh, good. That's fun.
Yep.
Now, in this CAT program, where you have, as you say, highly qualified and specialists, do they have any specific private jet, if you will, to really zing them through?
They do not. We all work together as a team, and the team is, a key element in everything we do. Whether we're working with ground support, we're working with the refuelers, we're working with the logistics people who resupply us. We work closely, and they work closely with us, the critical air transport team. The 500 miles an hour is 500 miles an hour if you're in a C-17 or if you're in a C-21.
Okay,
Yep.
good answer.
Yep.
Yeah. Like how much is a pound of feathers weight
Right.
versus a pound of lead.
Right.
Okay.
That doesn't take away from, we had alert missions where you were on alert status of, say, an Alpha, and you had 1 hour to respond. The CCAT team was treated a little bit differently in that they didn't get crew rest like we did, and they fall in the structure of medical in the Air Force transport world into a little different category. We could all get alerted with an urgent patient that may have just been brought to Bagram Air Base that needed to go to Germany because he was categorized as an urgent or a priority. And what would categorize those is life or limb categorizations. They were in threat of losing their life or losing limbs because of the insults that have happened to them. And we would get an urgent mission, take an aircraft in the grade system that we have would be basically plucked out of the air somewhere. It may have been tasked in Iraq, in LUD, maybe it was already in Afghanistan at a different base. It would get tasked as an urgent to come up to us, and then we would take off for the 7 or 9 hour flight to Germany. To get that it could be one individual, and all those resources needed. It's worth the investment of getting that one individual.
Absolutely,
Yep.
yeah.
Which I think is very different than what
it used to be.
Used to be.
We got room for 5, which if you can walk, you wait. If you
Right.
can't walk, we'll take you on
Right.
the backside. No.
Right.
Now, there's always, well, a bad word to put it, but there's always some of these situations that are not funny or humorous, but are lighter than the normal body and soul we got to say to them. Sort of. Have you experienced some of the things like that that make you kind of look back and laugh and say, you know, this isn't too bad a job after all, no matter what?
Well, you know,
is that a fair question?
It's a very fair question, and there's plenty of experiences like that. I can't remember one in the military that came to mind, but I was just having this conversation. I was helping put on a paramedic refresher class in North Adams the other week, and we got talking, because we all have war stories, whether it's from our civilian side or our military side. But you do remember certain things, and I can remember one of the first trauma motor vehicle crashes I went to as an EMT, and not because of the severity of the wounds or the outcome of the patient, but rather because of what the patient was wearing. I can tell you when it happened, where it happened, how the patient was injured. Something, and it had the humor point to it that you don't forget. Military, I can't think of anything that comes to mind like that. We certainly have had, you know, some characters that even under extreme conditions of their injuries and stuff may bring a smile to your face and have a tremendously positive outlook. But I can't think of any in
okay. Now, to that point, now that you're getting, I think, near the end of your career, have you had any people, patients, if you will, that somehow you've bonded with over the time? You see them now and then, and you just are buddies?
Well, you get that more on the civilian side. Because we're such a transient group in aeromedical evacuation that you may remember certain individuals, not by name, maybe not even by face, but by injury. And, you know, and I do have a story that sticks out. Back in '04, we were tasked and alerted to fly into Iraq. In '03, we were flying into Baghdad to pick up our patients. By '04, Baghdad International Airport was far too dangerous a place, and we flew not that many miles away from Baghdad into an airbase called Balad. I remember picking up a patient, and it was during the Fallujah campaign. Fallujah was an extremely, extremely busy system for the troops on the ground, a very busy time for the groups on the ground, a very busy time for the system, because we were, for lack of another word, kind of overwhelmed by the amount of casualties and the patients that we had to move. And the system did what it was supposed to do under some very trying times. I remember an individual who had received a gunshot wound to his femur, the upper leg, shattered his leg, and how they had stabilized it in the field. And that, why that was particularly interesting to me was because of my surgical background. We transported him to Landstuhl Army Medical Center. And because we were dual tasked, you know, our mission was to fly into theater, but also to transport the patients from Germany back to Andrews Air Force Base, where they would be distributed out into the system by where their home base was or by their medical requirements. I happened, and this was like 3 days later, I happened to have the same patient now going back from Landstuhl to Andrews Air Force Base. And he was in an Army base out on the West Coast. Ultimately was going to be his home destination. I don't know why I remembered it, but I do remember that the stabilization system they had to stabilize his femur was gone, because they had taken him into surgery and they had put a big metal rod down his leg. So that told me the kind of care that these guys were getting in 3 days. And then we were transporting him back to Washington, D.C. to Andrews Air Force Base, where they would go to either Bethesda Navy Hospital, to Walter Reed Army Medical Center, or possibly just into a holding pattern for a day or two because they were stable enough to keep moving on into the system. And I remembered the individual's last name, and that's pretty much all I remembered about him. And for some reason, 6 or 9 months later, after being home, he was one of those individuals that stuck in the back of my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And through the wonderful or violating internet that we have, I was able to do a Google search using 411.com or one of those, typed in the last name to the area on the West Coast where I thought he might be. I came up with 2 or 3 addresses, one which I could eliminate right away. The other 2 I looked, and one happened to be a military base, his home address. Mm-hmm. So I took the chance of picking up the phone. His wife answered the phone. I told her who I was. I apologized for the call. I didn't mean to offend anyone. I told her that I had remembered her husband through my journeys in Aerovac during that time in my life. And she said, well, you've got the right person. He's doing okay, and if you want his cell phone, he's out of the house right now. I called him on his cell phone. We reconnected for a minute. I don't know that I don't remember his name today. Oh. I don't know that I would be in his mind, except for maybe the phone call and this one connection. He was at Burger King going through the drive-thru, still in the military. He was pending disposition about whether he could stay in the military or not due to his injuries. So there was a...
But it's back there.
Yeah, it stays right there.
Never will be erased.
Yeah, it won't be.
Never will be erased. Now, as you climb the ladder, if you will, from 1 to 2, 2.5 stars and what have you, what's been your progress as far as different change of command and different responsibility changes?
On a personal level, the more experience you have and the higher the rank you become a little bit of an encyclopedia, able to share your knowledge with those that are coming up behind you. Mm-hmm. I find that a personally extremely rewarding part of my life right now. I enjoy the teaching aspect. I enjoy the mentoring role. I love watching the kids going out the door for the first time. And it's somehow, it might sound selfish, but I want them to be with me and to be able to walk them through. And I think many of us feel that way when you've been doing it for a while and you have a good background in deployments and real world experience. You sort of, I have 3 daughters. My wife, Patricia, my oldest daughter's Jessica, she's a clinical psychologist. My second daughter, Kelsey, is a teacher here in Pittsfield, Mass, and in the middle school. And my youngest daughter is a student. And you take these young kids you're going out the door with almost in the father role. They look up to you in many ways. They're going to ignore you in many ways, just like your kids do. They're going to talk behind your back about being with the old man. And if they talk to me about being the old man, which many of them do, that's part of the game.
Join the club.
That's right. That's right. But that's part of the role I'm enjoying very much right now. Your responsibilities aren't more per se, but maybe they are, because maybe you have
You've
to
got a broader influence.
Put them, you do, you have that broader influence. You're putting them, you don't want them in harm's way. You want them providing the best care they possibly can. You want to stimulate them, motivate them, let them make sure they have great careers. You want to treat them like adults, and you want them to be respected for what they do.
Yeah. And as you say, in the teaching role, I lucked out once in a while. You may be working with someone or mentoring or teaching, and then all of a sudden you can almost sense that little light goes on. you've made a point. You've
Yeah.
given someone a little bit of a rise.
Yeah.
To me, that's the whole bottom line. That's the payoff. I
It
think.
is. You know, you talk about connections. Now, I may not have the connections with the patients that I would have in the civilian sector, where you don't forget certain individuals. You don't remember them all.
No, you can't.
But the aeromedical evacuation world is a very small world. It's probably 10, 11,000 people. And you go out the door and you will run into faces at conferences, at conventions, in the real world deployments. And I have been honored to cross paths and to serve again on the same teams and the same flight crews with people I've served with in the past.
Good.
And, you know, in the days of the cell phone now and the text messaging, the text messages come at the funniest times from people that you've been away from, but you know they're out in the system. Mm-hmm. You pick up the phone and you call them, and you never lose track. You never lose a beat of having left them 3 years ago or 9 months ago. Or
Yeah, now that you're still inactive or in the reserve, are you allowed to, or have you joined any organization like the VFW, the
I'm
Legion,
a member of
or
the American Legion. I have a funny story, and God rest his soul, retired Master Sergeant Gene Rupp was one of the hardened Master Sergeants when I came in our unit. My first 15-day tour was somewhere around 94. We went down to Dover Air Base to work in the hospital for a couple of weeks and learn the different ropes and the different departments. And Gene was a character in every sense of the word, one of those people I'll never, ever forget, as many of us from that era. Gene set up our organizational meeting when we all got down there at the American Legion. I joined the American Legion in '94. I was a member of the Walter L. Fox American Legion Post No. 2 of Dover, Delaware for many, many years, living in Massachusetts.
a long commute, though, isn't it?
I didn't make the monthly meetings. I did stop in there once or twice in the convening years. I'm a member of the American Legion in North Adams now. I'm recently had the good pleasure of getting involved with veterans and joined the World War II Club in Northampton. And I'm a member of the Reserve Officer Association.
Good. They'd like to use you as a recruiter right now.
It's a great thing.
Get some of these guys
yeah.
and gals to come out
Yeah.
and share their stories.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier, you said you had a couple of little souvenirs or photographs. You want to take a few minutes? And
I'd love to.
we have a handy-dandy guy back here. Red will
Let me see.
zero in
we
on
don't
him.
want to open that one. That was
No, that's your census.
That was the census form I'm supposed to mail in. I don't want to rip that open. Certain things become certain of importance for us. This individual is probably in my forefront, if not the tops, as one of my heroes.
Oh.
That's a woman by the name of Ann Gorham.
Can you get that? I'll hold you talk. You can
I'm
talk
very
to
fortunate to have married into a large family. My wife's grandparents are both alive. Wonderful, wonderful people. And my wife's maternal grandmother, her closest friend is Ann Gorham. Ann Gorham was one of the original flight nurses in World War II. I've had the great pleasure of not only getting to meet her, but to becoming friends with her. She lives down in the Arlington, Virginia area. I will be in that area for deploying this summer for a couple of months, and I know Ann and I will be getting back together. When I think of what I do and what I think of what Ann had to do in those days in the C-47 transporting from Europe to the States, it was a 4 or 5 day trip in a plane that couldn't fly higher than 10,000 feet because it wasn't pressurized. It was twin engine. It had poor lighting. It had poor environmental systems inside. Ann is one of those very special people. Yeah. I have a bunch of, I printed off a bunch, but you know, totally unrelated to what I do, some other heroes I've met. And in the center, if I can point him out, he's the third gentleman there holding the red certificate in his hand. I've had the wonderful pleasure and good fortune of meeting true true heroes in our country, and that's Sergeant Major Robert Baribeau, United States Marine Corps. Bob, I had the very good fortune of meeting maybe 10 years ago. We got past the military piece real quick and became very, very close friends.
Good.
I think of Bob every day. Bob died a couple of years ago.
The fruit salad, he's been around a week.
Bob was a Vietnam vet. Bob was commissioned in a battlefield commission, and you might, the audience might know better than I, that in Vietnam they couldn't keep up with the amount of officers they needed. No. Bob retired again as Sergeant Major. This is just some of the things we do. I know some of the individuals. That's a flight that was coming back into Germany in '03. We were offloading patients.
Do you ever notice a lot of these guys, they may be hardened men, but they have a certain concern and compassion that everybody gets a little extra special care?
They do. Everybody is an individual. You're not a load of patients. You're not the gunshot wound. Everybody was. This individual, like many of the individuals I've had the good fortune with, is one of those people that would throw himself in front of the bus for you, and that I would do the same for. That's retired Master Sergeant Daniel Kibe from Northampton. Recently retired last year. I miss him every single day. Northampton's not that far, and it's great to be in touch with him.
Oh, yeah.
Those are some of the people that we've made our careers with, that you just will be taken to your grave with you.
Oh, yeah.
Just to give you a sense, a little bit of what we do, that's a mission back in '05. 04 into 05. I'm not sure where we were going. I suspect, though, that we were going back to Andrews Air Force Base from Germany. That's in the middle of a C-17, and I can tell you that by its roominess. And I'll show you another picture to give you a comparison of how roomy it is. This was a mission, probably we were in, and I'm just looking at the trees on the tarmac in the background, makes me think it was Andrews Air Force Base. We were offloading patients there. That was in a C-141. It was a great aircraft to transport patients in, but it had low ceilings. It didn't have quite the light, enough light. It didn't have quite the environmental controls, but you could move a lot of patients in it. I'm pretty tickled to think that I have air hours transporting patients in 141s and C-9s, airframes that have been out of the system now, and that the kids coming in just will never have had the experience to.
How many hours do you have, flight hours accredited?
I have 1,629 hours. I probably have a couple of hundred hours of combat hours, and I have about 60 sorties, 70 sorties of combat sorties flying in Aerovac. I was awarded the Air Medal back in '05 after my Germany tour. And of the 15 medals and citations I have, that's the one where you say, wow, this is the one I earned, this is what I did, and I'm just so tickled. It has such a personal meaning to me to have that.
And they don't hand them out.
They don't hand them out, and you know, all those that came before us, it's hard to, the days of receiving the Air Medal or the Air Achievement Medal, it just didn't happen because we weren't at war. There were many people that have retired before '09 that served 20 years, did their service to their country, but never saw combat, never were called to the tasking, though they were ready to go.
Would you want to give us just a quickie on this
one? Sure.
That's,
in fact, the woman there is, she's a major now in the Air Force, yes.
Okay.
She's a flight nurse out of Andrews Air Force Base. She was a wonderful mentor. In '03, it was my first deployment. I was deployed to Ramstein Air Base, where I was a part of the 791st Expeditionary Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron. I will be crossing paths with her this summer when I'm deployed to Andrews. I found her on the list of nurses that are going to be position down there with myself, and I'm looking very
Great.
forward to seeing her.
Any more little?
Well, I do, and again, there are
wanted-
little personal things.
Oh,
some of
here
the,
we go.
This patch here, that's our unit patch. I'm a member of the 439th Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron. I've been with that unit all my life, although before that it was part of the 74th Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron, and again out of Westover when they changed the rules or regulations so that all the AirVac squadrons reflected the wing that they were attached to, and Westover is the 439th wing. Air
The
wing.
helping hand. They're great.
This was the 455th Aeromedical Evacuation Expeditionary Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron. That was a unit I was attached to in Bagram, Afghanistan, from January to May of 2009. And we love to trade patches. Some of them are avid patch collectors. That was the 130 Air Group that I had the pleasure of flying with.
Okay.
We were supported by the Air National Guard for aircraft back then.
And as the man said, believe it or not, the time has come to say thank you.
And I can't believe that
I know.
time has gone by.
Robert, welcome home and glad to have you
Thank
with
you,
us,
Bob.
and we thank you for the show.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate what you've done.
I'm
Folks,
tickled pink.
again, we can only say thank you, but this is one more little piece of that puzzle. If you've got a story to tell, don't be bashful, because if you don't tell your story, nobody else will. And we want to make sure everybody has a chance. Bob Stevens, again, welcoming you to come back and see us next time, but more important, to come and see us if you'd like to share the program with you. Stay well, stay healthy, and God bless.